Hello everyone. Let's start this out by wishing you all a happy new year. We've hyped up this release on our Discord quite a bit, so I think it'll need some justifying. Today is the 2-year anniversary of Ikarus development. That's right, we started on the 19th of January 2019. With this celebratory date, I would like to present the newest project we've worked on. But before that, we'll take a little journey through time. If you don't care about the personal details and just want to skip ahead to where we announce what's new, feel free to use the timestamps in the description, which YouTube should showcase on desktop with their new chapter feature. How it all began. In summer 2016, I found an app called Character Planner on the Google Play Store. It allowed you to create, characters, and then specify some very limited information about them, including, almost exhaustively, the name, race, height, eye color, hair color, and weight. What I didn't like was the fact that it was so limited, and from that basis, the idea of Ikarus was born. What if an app would not only allow you to specify the information about certain parts of your world, but also what entities actually constitute your universe? That was roughly 6 months before I learned to code, so at that time nothing came of it. In January 2017, I picked up Java as a consequence of my school's computer science course, which was absolutely horrible, as you might have expected. Following that, I autodidactically taught myself to code, starting with Java and quickly moving on to C++. The first attempts. The first attempt at Ikarus was a CLI written in C++ in April 2017, which was... let's move on. The next attempt happened a lot later when I met a friend of mine that told me about the concept of world building. This made me realize that there was an actual target group beyond me that could be interested in a project like Ikarus. I finally found a way to create a GUI back then, which was with a framework called JavaFX. This resulted in the second attempt of Ikarus, which was at the time still called Fantasy World Creation Tool, or FWCT for short. That version would last about a month, after which it was scrapped. A few months later, I started anew, still in JavaFX and with more experience than ever before, which was also scrapped because I lost interest. But then, finally, the stars misaligned. It was September of 2018. I was an 18-year-old lad with about 1.5 years of hobby-related programming experience. I just finished my A-levels, so I wanted to study computer science. However, there was an error on my local university's website, which caused me to miss the deadline by 4 days. I talked with Faded about that, and he recommended that instead of just working for a year or starting to study something else that shares modules with computer science, I could use that time to work on personal projects, as there will never be such an opportunity again. And so it was. I quit my part-time job, as did Faded, who wanted to work on his own projects as well. This allowed me to leave on the 12th of January 2019. In the meantime, Faded and I talked about him joining Ikarus' efforts as a backend developer, which he agreed to. We started again in JavaFX, but this time with Groovy, a dialect for the Java programming language, which is awesome by the way, really, do check it out. Faded had more experience as an application developer than me, although his knowledge was still severely limited. Early on, he only proposed some solutions for persistent storage, namely SQLite as our database. I had roughly 2 years of programming experience at this point, and all of it was spent on very small hobby projects, so needless to say, I made a lot of mistakes early on. Most of these mistakes led me to believe that I used the tech stack we had wrongly, or that we simply had the wrong one. So we rewrote our code frequently. We went from Groovy to Java due to performance concerns, then from SQLite to RethinkDB, then to MongoDB, then to MongoDB with a different approach, then to MongoDB with yet another approach, then to plain binary serialization, then to serialization using a library called Cryo, then to Cryo but with a different approach, and that's where we ended up on. It was mid-2019 by this point, and we had set our eyes for the initial release of Ikarus to be in mid-July. The reasons for this were plentiful. Faded had a lot more costs than I did, so his funds wouldn't remain forever. Likewise, I wanted feedback on whether people actually needed a project like Ikarus and liked its concept. I was never really happy with JavaFX. With hindsight, a large part of that was inexperience, but not all of it. Quite a lot was because it was very convoluted, and even the simplest things would require tons of effort. 2 weeks before release, I found a library called Dear ImGUI. Well, I had found it before, but I only tested it at that point. And it was incredible. Dear ImGUI was what I always wanted. It was fast, it was extremely easy to use to get simple things running, and very flexible to get more complicated things set up. So I spent those 2 weeks at roughly 100 hours a week working my cheeks off to rewrite almost everything we had in the Java version over to Dear ImGUI in C++, a language which I hadn't touched in roughly over a year at that point. and I managed it. For the initial release of the 12th of July 2019, Ikarus base feature set was complete. But DMGUI isn't without its problems. Ikarus is a very text-driven app, and if there's one thing DMGUI lacks, it's text support. Ikarus is also a very international program, and if there's another thing DMGUI lacks, it's internationality. Ikarus also has a large user base which comes from programs such as Word or Excel, and thus they expect a very clean user interface and, more importantly, a clean UX, which DMGUI does not have. As we worked more and more with it, improving the UI and our code, I realized that DMGUI just wouldn't cut it. Without large modifications to the source, I would not be able to continue creating Ikarus for years to come with it, and the time spent doing that would outweigh the benefits. So I looked around, I always did, and I stumbled upon Qt, which is the de facto C++ GUI library. I would go as far as to say that next to Boost, it is the de facto C++ library. As always, I had stumbled upon Qt at an earlier point, but didn't like it when I first tried it out. I rewrote Ikarus to Qt, hoping that it would finally be right, that it would finally be what we always wanted and needed. A cross-platform, mature, stable, international, performant, customizable GUI library with a nice API in a language that we liked. This is what my English teacher would have called a foreshadowing. And Qt was... Now before I tell you why this failed still, let's look at Qt in a bit more detail. You'll probably know this very specific look. It's used in many standard GUI applications that aren't very complicated. They all look the same and only use very standard functionality. This is what Qt was made for. Apps that are supposed to feel native and solve Office-related tasks. Don't get me wrong, Qt as everything can be customized almost indefinitely. The question is just, how much work do you have to put in order to do so? Let's give some examples of things that are extremely complicated to do in Qt. Having a button with a red border on the bottom. Having a combo box with a red arrow. Having a button in a list. Actually, I need to go into a little more detail for this one. Next to text, Ikarus is all about lists, trees, tables, and whatnot. It's a data management tool after all, so you can expect that to be a focus point. Qt has two disadvantages here. First, it is incredibly convoluted to create lists or other collections in Qt. And I mean hundreds of identical lines of code that overlap because of the similarity between things. Compare a blueprint tree view with an instance tree view. I managed to get this down quite a lot with a metric ton of optimization and abstraction, but it was still nauseating to create a new tree view every time, something that is trivial in JavaFX or DMGUI. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that you cannot have widgets inside your item view. Let's give a quick example here. Most of you are probably familiar with Discord. Let's head over to the friend list and hover over someone's name. You'll see a small X button pop up, which, if you click it, closes the DM. This is a borderline impossible task in Qt without writing extremely hacky code that is not intended by the Qt creators or by completely rewriting the entire item view API from scratch, both of which taking an exceptionally long time, are buggy at best, and are terrible to maintain. And that's just for one button. If you have anything beyond that, you're dead, kiddo. Qt features one way to add widgets to item views, but that is tagged with being extremely imperformant and should only be used if you have static content, which we do not. So Qt sucked, and we rewrote everything like 14 times in it and were never happy. It was a working relationship, but it was a toxic relationship. I realized that I could not keep working with Qt for the next few years. I looked around, I always did. I looked at Avalonia, WPF, WinForms, Electron, JavaFX again, WX Widgets, GTK, Nuclear, DMGUI again, Ultimate++, Juice, QML, and more. None of them were what I wanted. At this point, I was quite proficient as an application developer, so I knew what shortcomings to look out for. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Now I should mention, this version is abridged. There were plenty of rewrites within each toolset that we used, trying to make it work for us, always thinking it was our own fault for misusing the library. A remnant from the time where I simply wasn't proficient enough to judge what was right and what wasn't. Furthermore, some of these looking into were week-long tasks that were basically a rewrite light, TM. Whilst I am presenting this in a very memey way, this actually depressed me quite a bit. The features of Ikarus are largely trivial to implement, and if there was no GUI, we probably would have been done 15 times over already. The issue was always the existing GUI toolkits. Now why was that? You see, a company like the Qt company, yes, that is their actual name, makes money by having as many people as possible use their tools. Not all of them make money, by the way. GTK is completely open source, as is Dear ImGUI, though it does have sponsors, etc. But that's not the only point. The most important part is that they all try to fit a specific need. Dear ImGUI largely focuses on tech-related tools. It is mostly used by game developers, or sadly cheat developers, to create debug overlays, or cheats. You'll see it in a myriad of places, such as with Nvidia, Blizzard, Ubisoft, EA, etc. Qt, on the other hand, tries to fill the need of programmers who need to develop stable but simple applications that don't need to look great, just familiar. It is used by, for example, OBS, VLC, KeyPass, and many other Office-like programs. And we simply did not fit that description. There was one framework which would have fit our requirements: Electron. Electron is supposed to be a GUI toolkit for people who mostly care about design. It is really just a Chrome browser rendering one single website on your PC. It is used by Discord, Spotify, MS Teams, Campfire, though that's a story for another time, and many others. Now, why didn't we use it? It supports all we could ever want. Because you write your code in JavaScript, because it's insecure, because it's extremely imperformant and chucks memory like it's nothing. We personally disliked Electron, and whilst I love Ikarus with a passion, I would dread every day of work if I used Electron. There's also WPF, or WPF, which would probably have been great, but it's Windows only, and given that I myself mostly use Linux, I really don't want to develop an application that I couldn't use myself. Being cross-platform was always a requirement. So that's where we were a few months back. I know it's largely been radio silent, and that is completely my fault. When I try something new out, I do not feel comfortable announcing it, and the longer I don't announce something, the more I feel like the announcement should be big, something proper, something complete, instead of just being, oh, by the way. I really do need to work on my communication and transparency skills. Without trying to put all the blame on it, last year hasn't been particularly friendly to me. COVID hit me hard, as I already sit inside a lot, what with all the work being on my computer and all my non-social hobbies being there too. I used to work out regularly and meet up with friends to compensate for that, but COVID put a stop to it. We were also hit pretty hard financially, which stressed me out quite a bit. I'm not saying that COVID is the reason why Ikarus isn't fully functional already. It really isn't. We wasted months on the data server alone, a feature that turned out to be useless and was scrapped later on. That would have happened with or without COVID. Faded also dropped from the project as a part-time developer to a helps-out developer due to the fact that he had some personal business going on and then needed to find a proper job because his funds were running low. Most of you probably don't know too much about application development, but I presume a lot of you will know more about game development. This is very akin to choosing the right game engine for yourself, although game engines are a lot more flexible than GUI libraries. And now Graphite, aka what you actually came for. Starting in August 2020, I played around a bit with OpenGL and my own rendering engine. This was really innocuous at first. I just wanted to take a bit of a break from the Ikarus grind after we had finalized the preview version. One thing led to another, and I quickly realized how far I had become as an application developer. How simple I found it to design certain aspects of a GUI library. It took us a few months, interluded by holidays and sadly sickness, but we are finally at a point where I'm happy to announce, showcase, and also soon release Graphite version 1.0, our very own ImGUI-style GUI library. In the previous analogy, this is akin to a game developer creating their own engine for their project and will enable us to develop exactly what we require and want for Ikarus and any other application we want to develop in our lifetime. It is tailored for us specifically. First of all, let's get a rough overview. Graphite is powered by Tape, which is the OS abstraction library we've written. Tape allows you to manage Windows and user input on Mac, X, which is Linux, and Windows. Wayland and others are planned for the future. Graphite, on the other hand, is a complete GUI library. It is run using OpenGL 2.0, which gives us backwards compatibility for roughly 15 years. It features an MSDF font renderer to allow text to look good at any sizes without using a lot of VRAM or CPU power. It is multi-threaded and uses a separate thread per window to allow multi-viewport functionality. It uses a semi-ImGUI approach where we first create a DOM, then solve all layouts and other constraints, and then render it. All this at a still very solid performance, which can always be improved. Average GUIs can easily reach hundreds of frames per second if left uncapped. It is completely customizable and stylable. It features a fully fledged animation framework. It features a fully fledged layouting system, supporting minimum, preferential and maximum sizes, grids with columns, rows and spans, auto-sizing, dependent and percentage sizes, and region-independent alignment. We have currently implemented only a few widgets, namely buttons, labels, text fields, checkboxes, radio buttons and tab areas, though creating them is rather trivial with Graphite and the rest will follow soon. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about what Graphite is and what it isn't. Graphite is not supposed to look native. Graphite is supposed to be completely customizable. Graphite is not supposed to be as performant as Dear InGUI. Graphite is supposed to be performant enough to render at least 20 to 30 FPS on lower end systems. Graphite isn't supposed to be developed as a generic tool for all. Graphite is supposed to be an in-house tool that we share with the world, so if anyone finds it useful, they can freely use it either for their own projects or as a reference. Graphite isn't supposed to run on embedded or mobile devices and thus doesn't much care about being dependency-less. Graphite isn't supposed to be compatible with old code bases, thus it requires C++20 or above. Graphite is supposed to be internationally viable and mature. For that goal, we have incorporated the ICU library, although most international features aren't implemented yet. Whilst all that is pretty amazing, the part I am most proud of is the API. Graphite looks like it's a DSL, similar to a mix of HTML and CSS when you code with it, but it is completely native C++. I do not kid when I say that I showed my mom a snippet of code and she understood it. The only thing I had to explain to her were for loops, and that's not really my fault. As great as all of that is, Graphite also comes with some drawbacks, mainly accessibility. Writing software that is completely functional internationally is hard, even with ICU. There are input method editors, right-to-left text, bidirectional text, right-to-left layouts, and a lot of established guidelines that you need to follow. So, for the initial release and the first transformation of Ikarus to Graphite, anyone using non-Latin based scripts or similar will sadly be unable to use Ikarus for the time being. This is a priority for us though, and with ICU on our hand, we will be able to implement this functionality eventually. I do expect that only a minority of our users are affected though. Dead key support is already enabled, so English, French, Greek, Cyrillic, Turkish and many other languages should still be supported. It only becomes troublesome once your language features compound characters such as Mongolian, right-to-left text such as Hebrew, or requires input method editors to be put in, such as Chinese. Furthermore, we lose a lot of maturity that a software like Qt, which has dozens of people working on it and has existed for 2.5 decades, brings with it. We'll need a lot of testing and would only be natural to have some bugs in the UI that will be fleshed out over time. This is all a one-time overhead, however, and the good part is, unlike with Qt, we can actually fix the bugs if we encounter them. So that's it for Graphite. That is the huge announcement. I really do hope you're not disappointed. I wholeheartedly believe this is it. It doesn't get more tailored than this. If Graphite doesn't work, nothing would. So with it as a basis, once it is fleshed out enough, we will be able to rapidly develop Ikarus and its new features. The new year. 2020 has been shit for most of us. Unless you have stocks in Tesla, then congratulations. By the way, we have a Patreon. Jokes aside, I didn't behave ideally this year and went against a lot of what I stood for as a creator, namely transparency with our users. For that reason, I have created a proper plan with 2 New Year's resolutions, but unlike going to the gym, I'll actually stick to these. First of all, we'll have a weekly devlog again. Once a week, no matter how much happened, we'll post a message that explains what we have done that week, even if it just says, I played a bunch of League and it made me feel awful. I have to own the fact that I am not always working the perfect 30 hours a week, both for transparency reasons and for honesty reasons, as well as putting some good pressure on myself. Secondly, we will expand the rewards for our patrons. I've long thought about what I could add there, and we have some ideas in the making that would at least show some gratitude to the people that have unconditionally supported us despite the lack of visible progress. I sincerely hope from the bottom of my heart that this year will be better than the last. But no matter what comes, as I've said to the people on our Discord already, I promise that I will do everything in my power to make Ikarus a software that I'm not only proud to present, but also happy to use and share with others, as much as my abilities allow me to do that. Thank you for watching, and until next time.